Oh, Luchar's here! And Taldemar! We have the tanks and healer. We can beat this. This, easy. We have 1 healer and 2 tanks. We can probably beat this first try if the 3 of us nails it. Uh-oh. I think we're going to have some deaths. Yep. That is a stack marker. Welcome back to the mental roulette grind. Once again, with more stream highlights on a Tuesday evening. For this one, while we still change jobs every duty, guild hests don't count. Not that it came up that much. We also had a surprising amount of extremes. That said, for duty 1, we went to Pharos Sirius hard as Gunbreaker. And each boss is quite strange in this one, so let's talk about them. The first boss, first of all, is where blue mages learn ethereal mimicry, so you may have met before, but also only has one proper mechanic. Throughout the fight, the boss will summon orbs that tether to random players, and these tethers must be handed off to any creature in the arena. It doesn't really matter what, but if the tether resolves without being handed off to something, the orb turns into a mini version of the boss, which gives it a damage boost until the ad is killed. And that ad is also a lot sturdier than if the tether lands on one of the creatures instead. The tether is handed off simply by running into the creatures. The second boss is quite a lot of ad barfing, and of course, as the tank, cleaving everything is a solid move. However, the one secondary enemy you have to deal with are these alchemy engines. How do I know that? Well, as long as the boss is tethered to them, you get stunned and counterattacked each time you hit the boss. It is simply not worth the hassle. The rest of the mobs can decently well be dealt with by just AoEing them down. The final boss may be especially interesting if you're into Palace of the Dead, but unlike the Palace of the Dead version, and unlike the first 2 bosses here, as long as you make just mild effort at hitting the ads, the boss goes down simply by hitting enough, making it much easier than the first 2. I'll also add that the areas between bosses have some really wild pulls as well, but we made it through reasonably well. For duty 2, we are an immediate warrior replacement for M6N, Arcadion's Sugar Riot, and our Dragoon knew me. Hello. They checked in on the stream a bit later. Around halfway through the fight, we have a bit of chaos when both our samurai and one of our healers go down just before multi-stack marker. Thankfully, it is relatively manageable to just take, even with 6 or 7 players. Aside from that, the duty goes very well. My personal record clear speed on the fight is early in the thunderstorm part, which is a bit sooner than what we saw here, but that's fine. I usually only go that fast when most of the team is my own pre-made party anyway. For duty 3, we went to the Tower of Babil as Dark Knight. Wow, 3 tanks in a row! Since we have a white mage healer, I think it's a good time to talk a bit about TBN in that specific context. The general advice I normally give for Dark Knights in large AoE pulls is to use TBN quite aggressively once you reach your destination. However, if your healer is specifically a white mage, this can cause some minor issues, also known as the enemies are stunned for the whole duration of TBN, so it doesn't break. Paying attention to how your healer chooses to play at the start of an AoE pull like that can greatly impact the ease or difficulty of the pulls. What I mean by that is that if your healer is a white mage, the simple rule of thumb is to just wait with TBN until after the holy stuns are over. But some white mages take a bit to get on with their stuns, and in those cases, using TBN sooner can be beneficial. The important bit is actually thinking about what makes sense with your healer, and so one specific solution isn't always the answer. Now, aside from that, on the first boss, this happened.
Ugh. A punch!
Sure, why not? And for the second boss, this is your PSA to pick up some Phoenix Downs, since they work in dungeons now. By the way, while not shown here, tanks can use Phoenix Downs while being actively attacked too. And despite this chaos, the rest of the duty went well. For Duty 4, we went to Ramuh Extreme as Pictomancer.
How many times must we teach you this lesson, old man?
And both Milo from my raid team and Taldemar are here, covering healing and tanking. After going over tactics, we start the fight with Taldemar zoning out a bit, causing them to be a bit slow on the orbs, which ends up killing off our Sprout tank. At the same time, our Bard dies to not being rescued from the Horrify. As we progress, we slowly realize that our Sprout tank might not be entirely clear on the fact getting too many orbs is bad. As we continue, it is worth mentioning for optimizing Pictomancer and this level range that you really want to make sure Striking Muse is used on cooldown now. Remember, you have 30 seconds to spend the hammer stamps, but the cooldown itself must be used to not waste it. Living Muse, on the other hand, is a bit strange. Unless you can hit 2 things with it, it is only worth it to paint and use Palm Muse in a single boss fight like this, if you are certain it will also lead to a Winged Muse and so Mark of the Ages. Which means, when a fight is drawing to a close, it is important to think about whether you will use the motifs you paint before painting them, which is also just generally good practice as a Pictomancer. Aside from that, all you can do here is spam fire and red filler. After the ad phase, we run into the overlapping problem of needing a tank switch at the same time as a tether needs resolving, which, while it all somehow works out, barely takes too long, causing Taldemar to go down. As we close in on the end, our Dragoon suddenly goes down, and I'm not actually sure why, since those purple lightning lines usually don't kill outright, I'm pretty sure. Right at the very end, another set of tethers go out, which is always scary since the tethers overlap with Horrifies, and sometimes the tethered players also get horrified and may now be stuck in the water hunting orbs. However, we managed to finish up nice and easy with me having wastefully painted palm motif and a hammer motif I won't get to use. Anyway, well done team! For Duty 5, we went to Ravana Extreme as Astrologian, featuring Lechar and Taldemar on the tanking. However, I apparently jinxed it by suggesting this will be easy, so on attempt 1, we have the classic have the raid dying to the stomps and dashes from Liberation, into not making the DPS check of Warlord Shell into a wipe. This also happens, in fact, in even grander fashion on attempt 2, and we somehow survive Warlord Shell well enough to continue forward. We get to the final phase, and half of the raid dies to the initial knockback, which then causes me to go down to the white marker, which is actually a stack marker in a hat, causing the wipe. Now, for attempt 3, we have me as the safety Dorito to try and help us survive Liberation better, which works magnificently. So well, in fact, that we skip the butterfly phase entirely. We also see no deaths for the final phase knockback, and while we end up breaking a wall with the stack marker, we do survive it. After that, Ravana readies up Serpanaka, which you can pass around like a hot potato, and is meant to be handed off to a tank, so I grab it off the white mage and hand it off to Lechar. She's my hot potato! After that, we finish up the fight. Well done. For Duty 6, we went to Ultima Weapon Extreme as Viper, and Taldemar is here too, this time as Reaper though. Our Sprout tank from Ramuh Extreme is also here. On the first attempt, as is typical, we have a tank death to no tank switch, and a wipe to one set of orbs in the final Aetheric Boom clashing together. On the second attempt, tank switching happens correctly, and while we have a death here and there throughout, the final set of orbs actually kill no one, which is oddly rare, and allows us to very quickly wrap up the fight. Nice and quick. For Duty 7, we went to A1N, Alexander's Oppressor, and a really random lesson this boss teaches is that if you have a significant amount of jobs that are particularly burst heavy, it might be important to more evenly spread your damage on the 2 bosses at the end, or even hold your burst until the second boss arrives too. The reason for this is that once one of the bosses die, the other one starts casting a Hot Enrage, and while a more homogeneous damage output might make this somewhat trivial, if your team is more burst and cooldown period centric, you might completely vaporize one of them, only to be incapable of finishing off the other, as happens here. On the run back, some of us, or at least I, intentionally hold cooldowns to be sure to burst the second Oppressor so they die closer together, which works out well. For duty 8, we went to Hostile Raves as Summoner, and in a totally surprising twist, actually, no it isn't, it is definitely optimal to simply hold Ether Charge until the Gobu arrives, as all the other mobs get two-shotted by Ruin regardless. I don't even think there is that much value in getting Ruby Copy quicker for the Gobu, so just send the Ether Charge for that, and if it ends, I don't think Ruby Copy can hit it before it dies. For duty 9, we went to Tender Valley, again as Summoner, since the last duty was a guild test. And no, that is not a mistake, but a weird coincidence, considering we also had Summoner in Tender Valley last week. Something that is worth thinking about specifically for Summoner is to plan Ifrit for points where it isn't a problem to be in melee range. For the first boss, this matters for the knockback sections, and if you keep track of when they take place, make sure that Ifrit either takes place before that, or that you have enough stuff to do that you can hold Ifrit until after the knockback is resolved properly. For the final boss, in a similar way, aim to avoid having Ifrit overlap with the Great Labyrinth mechanic, although, depending on timing, swift casting Ruby Rite during the slide could be somewhat effective. Another point where Ifrit might be problematic is during the slime stacks at the end, as you might not really have the time to cast Ruby Rite in between the stacks. But aside from that, it should probably be fine. For duty 10, we went to Tam-Tara Deepcroft as Sage, with 3 classes. As a result, we take each pack one at a time, but it still goes reasonably fast. As a Sage, long-running AoE pulls at this level range are often very awkward since you don't have any instant casts beyond swift casting Atosis, so I didn't really mind. Overall, I think everyone in the team did pretty well, although I don't think I saw the Archer use Raging Strikes very often, if at all, and they sometimes used single target when there were several enemies, which is worth mentioning because the Quick Knock, I believe, is a gain on 2 in this level range. Both of those things are very minor in a dungeon like this, of course. Another funny thing is that I saw the tank use Arm's Length during the final boss, which means that they were above level 30, but it is possible this was like a 3-man of new players going through together and they hadn't reached the point where job crystals were available yet. I also noticed that the tank never used Berserk, which was quite peculiar. Anyway, all things considered, it is very possible the tank would be above level 30 before that job crystal point anyway. A reasonably paced low-level dungeon run. For duty 11, we went to Garuda Extreme as Paladin. On our first pull, the Satan Plume is not dealt with fast enough, which puts most of the raid to sleep and subsequently gets half the raid killed. While we had a summoner try to recover, we wipe up after all. With the second attempt, we deal with the plumes correctly and even clear up Shirada and Zapata quickly. However, we find as Garuda phase transitions that we have only a bit of rubble left and promptly wipe. The damage of that particular aerial blast is reduced per rock remaining, which is why it is so important to carefully avoid hitting the rocks with mechanics throughout the first half of the fight. On the third attempt, we have a healer die super early in the fight, but it is no big deal that early. We probably deal with the plumes and get the ads separated and promptly cleaned up. For this aerial blast, we can see the whole raid understood the assignment perfectly, as all 4 rock stacks are perfectly intact and we take no damage. This leads into the final bit of the fight, when synced you could say, because minimum item it might go a lot longer. While the spiny plume produces a barrier you really need for the next Mistral Shriek, most groups beat Garuda before it becomes necessary, and if it does become necessary, just use Tank LB and continue. The reason to do this is that the spiny plume also builds a debuff on whatever tanks it that can wipe you if not done properly, so it is simply too risky to figure out when it is kind of optional. Now, that said, I didn't realize we were actually hurting for time, so when the Mistral Shriek came, I was too slow with the limit break. We still survived, and Garuda came down with so little HP she immediately died afterwards. Even if it took a few tries, the fact we could see clear progress and improvement on each attempt made it very satisfying. For duty 12, we went to Over the T-shirt as Dancer. A duty so low level that we don't even have the funny standard finish. So 1-2s it is, I guess. I counted a total of 9 GZDs from me. Wow! And finally for duty 13, we went to E12N, Eden's Promise, as dancer. With Taldemar again. A quick reminder rundown is that Leviathan means hot wings, line in the center is safe, Garuda means cones on the cardinals, Ramuh means circle AoE, and Ifrit is a wide cone AoE north and south, making for a sliver of a safe spot on the east and west. Thankfully, any allowed combination of these leads to some safe spots, as Ifrit and Garuda can, for whatever reason, not be combined. Also, fun fact, often whenever Circus Tower comes up, people talk about how it is the only duty with stackable stack markers. This intermission also has stackable stack markers. Aside from that, the duty finishes up with no major issues in the second phase. Another interesting set of duties. I'm quite impressed with the performance of 4 extremes with no major issues. Overall, those 4 combined took less than an hour. And now we have also passed 18/37ths of the way on the achievement, getting really close to that halfway mark. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, while Sage not even having a dot in Tam-Tara might make you think it is the healer with the lowest button count at that level. You would be wrong. Actually, Sage, White Mage, and Scholar all equally have 5 buttons, and then Astrologian has 7 thanks to Light Speed and Essential Dignity.